Welcome, everyone, to GeekyJustin Live, the only Facebook Live show that has been twice nominated for the coveted GeekyJustin Award for Best Facebook Live Show. It still hasn't won. Stupid Green Book. Today with me on the show, my friends Greg and Lynn McDonald, authors of this book, Embracing the Journey, A Christian Parent's Guide to Loving Your LGBTQ Child. This is going to be a game changer. I have a pre-release copy. You can't really see it. I'll fix that. But anyway, there it is. That's what it looks like. It is going to be out actually tomorrow. It comes out tomorrow. So Greg and Lynn, hi. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Justin.
Absolutely.
So, I'm really excited to have this conversation. Let's start with just like a brief version of your story. Like, how did you get here? Obviously, a lot of it is in the book in much more depth, but like, what's the short version?
Good question.
Oh goodness, how did we get here? Well, we're Christian parents, and our child. I was going to ask you to start, but
I'll be happy to.
Okay, well, he does a better job than I do. I was like,
so when we have two children, Connie and Greg. Connie's our oldest, Greg is our youngest. When Greg Jr. was 17, we found him out as being gay, and when Lynn and I both came to know Christ, it was later in life. I was 27, Lynn was 25, and we kind of plugged into a very conservative church. And so that was completely incompatible with our son being gay. And so I would tell you that if you could do things wrong, boy, we did a volume of things wrong. And we created a lot of harm for our child, a lot of carnage. It was only after years of seeing the damage that we had done and realizing that at some point we were losing voice, if you will, influence in Greg Jr.'s life, that we became very, very serious about just trying to do what Jesus commands us to do, which is to love our God and to love our neighbor, certainly our son. And so that kind of put us on a trajectory that sent us down this road of not only loving Greg Jr., but his friends. And so, much like when Lynn's a breast cancer survivor, and when you have breast cancer, when you have cancer, all of a sudden, a lot of people that have cancer, just how it works. You have a gay son, all of a sudden our phone started ringing with friends saying, hey, would you talk to our good friends? Their child just came out, blah, blah, blah. And so we just very unintentionally started loving on a whole bunch of families that had LGBT kids, and that all kind of got wrapped up here a few years ago when we decided to form a nonprofit called Embracing the Journey. For the sole reason of building bridges. Yep, exactly, the book. The book of the same name. So we formed this nonprofit for the sole reason of simply building bridges between the LGBTQ individuals, their families, and the church, even when they seem at odds. And that's kind of how we got to where we're at. It was along that journey that about 10 years ago, God really put it on Lynn's heart to write a book. I'll let her tell you about that.
Yes. Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to ask me something else, but yeah, 10 years ago, God just put this burden on my heart that I need to write the story that He is writing, which is our journey. I am not a journalist. I'm not a writer at all. So I was like, how in the world am I going to do that? So so over the period of the 10 years, God had shown me that, and Greg, that maybe it wasn't just me writing the story. Maybe it would be Greg. Now, Greg's not a writer either. So here we are,
Honestly.
Two non-writers going to write a book. So, so that's when we came in contact with an agent who said that maybe, you might have to have somebody who helps write your story. And so that's why it's written the way that it is, because it's conversational. It was literally taped on an iPad by a writer, and then she just wrote it in a story form. And that's how that came to be. It wasn't something I really desired at first. We would always have these July 4th parties up at our home in Harper Springs, which was just a small town, and they always had a parade. And so it was a really big deal, this parade. And we'd invite people to come to it. And one of our friends who was there, I was telling him the story that, oh gosh, God's been putting this burden on my heart to write this book. And he asked the question, are you sure you want to be the face of it? And at that particular time, I said, no, I don't. I don't want to be the face of this. And so nothing came to be. And then finally, this past year and a half, we really decided to do something about it and get the story told. So that's how we're here.
That's how the book came to be.
Yeah, I love that the format of the book is very back and forth, very conversational. It's, Greg says, well, this is what I was doing. And then Lynn says, and this is what I was doing. And Greg says, and I saw that Lynn was doing this. And and it's that really wonderful conversational thing. I read this almost entirely in one sitting. And the only reason it wasn't entirely in one sitting is that I got interrupted. And so, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I think people are really going to love this book. It's an easy read, and it's very it's conversational. It's interesting, but it's also very relatable. People have told me, of course, I have a book, Torn, that talks about my journey coming out as gay and Christian and that whole struggle. And I've had a lot of people say to me that, Torn was a book that they could give to their parents to help their parents understand their journey as the LGBTQ child, but also that they could relate to. And it feels to me like Embracing the Journey is sort of the flip of that. It's for the kids. This is a book that helps us to understand what our parents are going through or have been through. And for the parents, this is something relatable. Like, oh, other parents have been through this. Other parents know these feelings. What are some of the things that maybe surprised you or were difficult for you on this journey? Because this has not been a short journey for you all, from the time that you found out your son was gay until you wrote this book. It wasn't like you just sort of immediately jumped out of the closet as PFLAG parents or something. This was a tough journey. So yeah. Oh, and I should tell our viewers, or anybody who listens to this by audio, that McDonald's don't have headphones that work with their computer right now, and so when I talk, you can't hear them. So for anybody who's just listening by audio, they were saying, no, it's this was not an easy thing. So I'll shut up and let them talk. But yeah, tell us what this was like for you.
I think one of the things was, there's a few things that really stood out, I think, to us along the way on our journey. So one was how many parents' stories are similar. So the book is really kind of a composite of our story, our learnings. What worked well in terms of helping our family be healed, what worked well in terms of drawing Greg Jr. To Christ, but it's also a compilation of hundreds of Christian parents that we've walked with, that we've coached and counseled over the years now. And so it's really interesting, because when you hear these stories from one family to the next, there's a bunch of common threads that weave them all together. and of what works and what doesn't. Well, what's harmful to a relationship, what isn't. And I'd say that's possibly one of the biggest findings, and the book is littered with that. The book has a ton of learnings that are not only ours, but a bunch of other families. And the other thing was, as we started developing more and more relationships with men and women that are LGBTQ, I think the thing that we found just repeatedly is the amount of grace, not only that they give us, but that they kind of give our community at large. And sometimes we actually feel guilty by association, if you will, by the way that the church responds to this conversation, right? We haven't done a great job as a body of believers in our estimation.
I also I was surprised about a lot of things, but a couple things that come to my mind right now is I was really surprised when Greg and I were invited to a group of LGBTQ plus people in their Bible study and to share our story. And Greg and I have shared our story a lot with people, parents primarily, but here we're about, 30, 40 LGBTQ people listening. And for the first time, for the first time, I was overwhelmed with shame that there was these group of people in front of me who I had all the answers to. And now I'm sharing this story of how I treated the LGBT community and primarily my son. And it just broke my heart because I looked at each one of them and I saw them differently for the first time. I saw them as creations of God, who God loves dearly and wants to have a relationship with. And I remember getting in the car afterwards and I was just like, oh my gosh, I had to apologize because I was just crying. I said, I'm sorry, I can't tell my story yet. And then this group of people just surrounded me with love and grace and said, it's okay, and I asked them for forgiveness for being one of those people who knew the answer for them, and they showed extreme grace. And I think the other thing that really was powerful for me is I was confused as a parent whether I thought I had to make a choice, love my child or love God, that I couldn't do both. Because if I loved my child, then I was turning my back on God. And if I loved God, then I was turning my back on my child. And what was a wonderful discovery was that was the greatest commandment, to love God and your neighbor, and how much more your son or daughter, regardless. It doesn't say except for the gay man, except for my transgender son.
The gossip, the liar.
It doesn't say that. And there was so much freedom in that. It didn't mean that it made sense to me. Like, all of a sudden I understood the Bible, 100%. But what I did get was that not only God commanded me to love my kids, that I could freely do that and know I'm okay with both.
What's really interesting about what Lynn was just sharing, she said that we read the greatest command. So for most of us Christians, we've heard the greatest command many times. Certainly for me, that was no different, and Lynn. And what Lynn's referring to is, when we found ourselves flat on our face, trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, just really leaning on God, the thing that we ultimately ended up doing was we spent a lot of time reading red letters. We spent time in the New Testament reading things that Jesus had to say. So specifically, we looked at who Jesus was, who he hung out with, what he had to say, and how he treated people. Pretty simple, right? And so as we're doing that, we come across the greatest commandment. And so if you think about the audience at the time who's quizzing Jesus, they're trying to catch him, trying to trap him. And they're saying, so teacher, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus, well, love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? And he says, and the second, like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how much more our own children, right? But he doesn't stop there. And that's what I always heard. I heard that commandment, but it always ended there. But he goes on to say, he says that all the laws and all the prophets hang on these two commands. So for me, I looked at that and I say, hey, it's like there's a 100-question exam, right? And Jesus is saying, get these two things right, and you pass. Get the other 98 right, miss these two, you flunk, right? And you got to remember, his audience at the time, he's speaking to the Jewish people, and they tried to keep 613 laws. So it wasn't like the 10 Commandments. They're trying to keep 613 laws. He says all the laws, all the prophets hang on these two things. And it's that kind of thing that the more we scoured the Bible and just really paid attention to Jesus, again, who he was, who he hung out with, how he treated people, what he had to say, things became very, very clear to us about how passionate he is about how we treat other people, regardless of who we agree on things.
So let me ask you a question, because I'm seeing some of the comments come in on the live feed, and lots of folks sharing their sympathy, crying faces when you're crying, and people are really appreciating what you're sharing here. One of the comments that's come in is too long for me to put it up on the screen or read it here, but is from somebody whose story is similar to many other stories that I hear all the time of a broken relationship, where the parents and child are just not able to communicate anymore, or the parents or parent have essentially disowned or cut off contact. In some of those cases, I know you're talking about that command to love. In some of those cases, I know those parents may feel that they are being loving by showing tough love and not accepting this thing that they see as sinful. What would you say? What would you say to those parents? But also, what would you say to that child who says, I don't know how to go forward in this situation because I feel like we're at an impasse?
So one of the things that people have said about our book, we seem to hear it all the time for the people who pre-read it, is that it's a very unvarnished story. And the reason why it is because many years ago we learned the value of being transparent, of being vulnerable. And we live in a society where people don't like to be vulnerable. We want to look good. We all have this image, this reputation, and so on, right? And but what we know to be true is that there's a lot more that we have in common with our story that other parents have in common as well than we don't. Okay, and so when we see folks that kind of glom onto the fact. And they say, hey, listen, this is a sin. So there's people that write great volumes of material about, interpretation of the scriptures pertaining to homosexuality. But just assuming for a moment, let's assume that it is a sin, right? Well, God says a whole bunch of other things are sins, right? So lying, stealing, gossip, gluttony, right? Like, where do you want to go? Pride, idolatry, right? I mean, most of us Americans, we got a problem with that one, right? Just look at our homes, look at all the stuff that we've made idols in our life. And so as a parent, one of the things, so when we talk to parents is to say, hey, listen, we're pretty vulnerable about things that we wrestle with personally, that I wrestle with. And we're like, hey, listen, be honest with yourself. What do you wrestle with as a follower of Christ? Now, for me personally, I happen to be in an accountability relationship with a good friend today. And for 15 years, I've been in 3 different relationships, one in West Michigan, one in Northern Michigan, one in Atlanta, with 3 different men. And each of these men, I gave permission to ask me tough questions. And I asked them specifically, check on me every week and ask me these questions about things I struggle with. You know, after 15 years, the questions don't change. I mean, the things I wrestle with today are things I wrestled with 15 years ago. And to think that somehow it just magically goes, well, I pray all the time, right? But the thing I know is that we all have sin in our life. So when we make your sin or my sin more important than somebody else's, it's very detrimental to any relationship. If you've ever had anybody treat you like a project, that never turns out well. And that's kind of where that starts to go when parents go down the road and say, Johnny, we love you, but, right? You don't hear Jesus saying that.
You know, well, first of all, what I would love to tell that person or those people out there who have that situation going on right now is, first of all, I'm really sorry about that. And it pains me. It pains me to think that they're going through that. So I wish it was different. And we pray that those families will be reconciled. Secondly, I would say, give your parents time to process this. That, you know, you've had time to process it yourselves. And you have to recognize that, you know, I've been, when I was growing up and learning about the Bible, I had been instilled what the Bible taught about homosexuality. And so it really took me a while to see that I'm still learning, I'm still growing in my faith, and that I just remember saying to Greg a while back, like maybe 10 years ago, I said, you know, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this one, but I love you and I want to have a relationship with you. You know how I feel. You know how I know how you feel. So we'll just move on from there. I'm not saying that that's where I am today, no. But I just wanted to instill the importance of allowing time to have your parents figure it out and what it means to love.
One of the things I really appreciate about this book is that you do, I mean, you call it embracing the journey, and you do deal a lot with this journey. I think so often the advice that we give to parents in these kind of situations is sort of like, well, here's where you need to get. Like, you need to be okay with this. You need to feel this way. You need to believe this. You need to understand this interpretation of scripture. You need to be, and, I know that for me, when I came out to my parents, there were a lot of things that I wanted them to agree with me on right away. And they didn't get there right away. And there were some things that I didn't know if they would ever get there. And the question for me and for them was, what do we do right now in the midst of this disagreement, sometimes very serious disagreement about some big issues? Is there any way for us to continue to have a relationship in the midst of that disagreement? And what does that look like? And what does that look like in a way that honors them and where they are, and that honors also me and my humanity, and that and those are tough questions. And I really appreciate that you deal very honestly with the journey. You deal very honestly with the mistakes that you made and things that didn't go well. You talk about, for instance, about being afraid to tell people what was going on and how much that impacted your own spiritual and emotional journeys on this, which is something I know that also happened with my parents, that they were afraid to tell people, and they didn't, and they were afraid for me to tell people, and that hurt all of us. And so, you deal with those things, but you also give a lot of practical advice along the way of like, okay, wherever you end up, but also wherever you are at any point on the journey, how do you continue to have relationship, and how do you continue to move forward? What I had a question in my head, and now I have about 10. When I see you all, both of you nodding your heads, so maybe I'll shut up and let you respond to that, and then I'll ask you a question. No, okay. Well, well, I guess what I want to ask is, what does it look like in your eyes to what can parents and kids do to continue to maintain relationship as much as is possible in the midst of disagreement? And are there limitations to that? I mean, that's always the tough question. Is there a time when kids have to, cut their parents out and say, I just can't talk to you right now, or, yeah, I have another question, but I'll ask that first. That's a tough one, I know.
You froze up.
Did I freeze for you? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, here, let me ask you this first question first. This is maybe an easier question. What is something that you think that kids may not understand about what makes this so difficult for parents? Because I know for me, it was, as I was reading this, there were moments that I was like, that's really helpful to get a sense of like, this is something that parents may be dealing with. Are there specific things that you think maybe kids don't always understand about the parent side of the journey?
Yes. In fact, one of the things that immediately comes to mind was I feared if I was wrong in what I was taught and believed that about homosexuality, what else wasn't true about the Bible, or what else did I misunderstood? And that scared me. And I think that scares a lot of parents.
Sure does.
So it really stems from fear. There is so much fear going on in the time of that parent's life. The fear for your child getting hurt by some hate crime or
disease,
or
any number of things, right?
Just having, as our son wrote in the foreword, some misguided hatred that you never want that for your child, and so that's really, really scary. And so a lot of those things stem from fear. But to your other questions, in regards to, one of the things that really helped me was our son, when he said, Mom, there is much more to my life than me just being gay. If you take a circle and you put it and you make it into a pie, that's a small sliver. But I am a neighbor, I am a son, I'm a brother, I'm an employee, I'm a citizen. There was so much more that he was saying that allowed me to see. I was just focusing on that little sliver, and that I could focus in on so much more. And that's what I would encourage kids to maybe tell their parents. And you may never agree on it, and like parents coming to agreement on it, but you can still have a relationship, and just see where it goes from there. I mean, obviously, prayer is a very important part of this.
Justin, when we named the book "Embracing the Journey," pretty creative considering our ministry is called "Embracing the Journey," but when we did, we were very specific, and that is because we encounter parents every week. We hear from folks all around the country, and something that that happens. So this is like 98% of the time. First of all, when people call us, normally they're in a free fall. Seldom do they call to talk about the weather. Normally when they call, they're hemorrhaging. And they're hurting. They don't know how to deal with it. They love their child. They don't know how to respond. And one of it's an anomaly that happens, and that is that when kids come out of the closet, most of the parents go in the closet. And while in the closet, we go there for different reasons, right? But I'd say primarily what Lynn was talking about earlier when she said, for kids to give your parents grace, give them some time. So for most people who are LGBTQ, they've been processing those feelings and everything that goes with that for many, many years. And by the time they finally come out to their parents, it's possibly the toughest thing they'll ever do in their life, right? So this is a big deal. For the parents, they get caught flat-footed. It's like a dump truck backed up and emptied its load in their laps. And the parents go, whoa, what do I do with this, right? And and interestingly, we see this all the time as well, and that is when parents learn the news that their child is gay, they head down this highway eventually. As long as they're in the closet, by the way, they don't go anywhere. They just prolong the pain. Right? The healing never comes, and the anger builds. And so we know too many parents that stay in the closet for many weeks, some for many months, and some for years. And it's tragic when they stay there because nothing gets healed. Right? But at some point, when they get out of the closet, they head down the highway and they reach a fork in the road. And that fork has two very distinct highways. And one highway says, Johnny, we taught you when you were a young boy that decisions have consequences. And this is a bad choice you're making. It's a really bad choice. To Lynn's point, there's hate crimes, there's disease, you're going to be discriminated against. There's a lot of bad things that it's going to be a tough life for you. And oh, by the way, Johnny, you're messing up my life, my good name, my good reputation. Right? I've worked hard for this reputation, right? And you're messing up me. and as long as parents go down that road also has very distinct outcomes. We're really familiar with that. If, on the other hand, when the parents reach this fork in the road and they take the other direction, that direction says, well, wait a second, Johnny, are you saying that this wasn't a choice of yours? That this is something that you're saying God made you like this? You were always like this? So even if I don't believe that God made you like that, let's assume for a moment that He's allowed you to be like that. In which case, then, my response becomes, oh, Johnny, what was it like growing up in our house? Johnny, what was it like processing all this by yourself? Johnny, how can I help, right? And so those two avenues have very distinct outcomes. And again, this isn't about, from our perspective, it's not about is it sin or isn't it sin. This is about following not Jesus's recommendations, not his suggestions, his commandments, to love one another, to love our God. And when we do that, really good things follow. It's not an easy road. It's still a rough road. There's still plenty to unpack. There's plenty to learn on both sides. But it's a tough journey, and that's why we call it embracing the journey, because our tendency, we all know this, our tendency is when storms of life come our way, we normally don't rub our hands together and go, oh, great, this is going to be a really bad storm, and I think we're going to learn something. Like, we don't do that. None of us do.
It's funny because our church, there's a saying that goes on, in regards to sin versus not a sin, because that is so contentious right there. It's like it's hard to have a conversation when both sides are so passionate about their stance.
Sure.
And so for us, we there's a sticker on the back of our car, and it says, what does love require of me? So we always try to encourage parents. What does love require of you right now with your child? What does that look like? And we talk about it. I mean, what's one thing that they can do to love their child well?
Do our actions make our children take one step closer to Christ, or do our actions push our children away from Christ?
There's no doubt. I was the Bible preaching mama. I mean, I pushed Greg Jr. away completely. And now I look at him, and by loving him and the people he loves in life, I find his faith has grown. And I'm thinking, wow, boy, I just had this wrong. But, it's a step at a time. I would tell LGBTQ plus children or individuals, it's just a step at a time. And, so much of it is we've been doing this, or we've known for 17 years. So there wasn't a whole lot back then, if you can just imagine, around, books to read. There was no Justin Lee and telling his story. So, our parents get educated.
I want to give some of our viewers a chance to ask their questions. And as people are doing that, I want to say, it's a couple of things. One is that I think both you and I wrote the books that we wished we'd had when we were going through this. But one of the things I really appreciate about your book is that you talk about this question of sin, and is it a sin? Is it not a sin? Whatever, and the question of what it is varies based on the child. Are we talking about a gay child, a bisexual child, a transgender child? But in the book, the advice that you give and the journey that you talk about is a journey that does not depend on the parents coming to a particular conclusion. You don't even say in the book where you ended up on some of these scriptural questions. You talk about the wrestling, but this is not a book that says, here's the answer we came to, and this book is only helpful to you if you come to the answer we came to, and here's what it is. You really do talk about this idea of loving your child, whether wherever you are on some of these passages. And already there are some of the comments that have come in touch on that, and on the importance of that journey. Ron Goodman says, having walked with the McDonalds during part of this journey, I know they have genuinely sought God's truth and guidance and are powerfully ministering to many people as a result of what God has taught them about loving their son. Beth really likes when you said when kids come out of the closet, most parents go into the closet. But one of the questions that came in that I want to ask you is this one: did you lose friends over accepting your son for who he is? When you say, okay, whatever conclusions you have on the Bible, our son is gay, we're gonna love him as our gay son, we're gonna love his friends and the LGBTQ people around him. Did you lose friends for doing that?
I wouldn't say it was actually a loss of friends. I think when I think of it as they didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. So a lot did nothing. So they just sort of pushed away, didn't spend as much time with us. There were a few incidences that, they wouldn't hug our son anymore, when before they knew he was gay, they would hug him. It was just, it was a difficult time. It was a very difficult time right then, because as I look back now, I give them grace because they just didn't know how to support us in that time of need. And there were a few that did it good, but not, I didn't even know. Greg didn't even know what we needed. We just wanted someone to say, hey, I don't have the answers to this, but I love you. I love your son, and we're in it together. Okay, we're just going to walk this with you, and so that was hard.
It's a rarity when people do that, but it's something that I think every parent longs for. And yeah, there were some casualties with some close friends and some family members that were, distance got put in, and it wasn't like people just walked away. But when you as a parent see your child being shunned or kind of held at arm's length, it's very common to just stop calling, stop coming around. You just see less and less of those people. So, yeah, there was some casualties. But I would say what the flip side of that is, we met so many incredible people. I mean, God has blessed us beyond our wildest dreams with incredible people and relationships all around the country with fabulous people. And with people just like us that didn't sign up for this any more than our kids signed up for it, right?
Yeah. We've got a comment from Stan who says, my mom lost friends when she accepted me. So tragic, and shares the willingness of people to elevate their interpretations of Scripture to deity over the law of love. And I would say, I think even, again, regardless of your interpretation of Scripture on some of these questions, you talk about that pie and the idea that, being gay or bi or trans or queer is like, a tiny slice of somebody's whole life. And then I would say even not only is being gay a tiny slice of my life, but even like for somebody who is gay, for instance, the sex questions that are really what those Bible passages talk about are a tiny slice of what it means for somebody to be gay. I always think it's, if people stopped and thought about it, how strange would it be if when we met straight married couples, we spent most of our time talking to them about their sex lives. I mean,
it's a different standard.
It is.
It is. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we assume that married couples are sexually intimate, but that's not what makes a marriage. It's not what marriage is about. And so. And being, a heterosexual person is not just about getting married. There's so many things about how you relate to people that are affected by that. So we've got a comment from Sandy who says, as mom of a gay son, I have gained so much more than I have lost. It sounds like that's been true for you all as well.
I was just going to I would not want to be the person I was when I first found out Greg was gay.
Neither one of us would. Yeah. I was the Christian who had all the right answers. I really believed I had the answers for most everything. Pretty arrogant. And when problems would arise, everything seemed to fit in neat little tidy boxes for me. And it wasn't until something much bigger than me, something that was way above my pay grade, where I started to realize that, you know what, man, that is just not true. None of that's true. And it's been super freeing to not feel like I need to have all the answers.
So Logan has a question, and we've touched on this a bit already, but I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Any advice for LGBTQ plus kids of fundamental Christian parents who aren't accepting? Is there something that that kids in that situation can do to have the best chance of understanding their parents or helping the conversation move forward? Or what would you recommend?
Well, there are, I mean, obviously, we have our book, but there's also lots of great blogs. I'm just gonna keep holding it up every time it comes up. I'm just gonna keep holding it up. Sorry, continue. But there's great blogs out there that people are having conversation about that you can learn from. I know. I mean, basically, you can Google it too online and just. I Googled it the other day and I came across like 100 different ones that would fit in practically any category from being Protestant to Catholic. So people are having that conversation. There are groups. Maybe you'll share about that. No, go ahead.
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is first of all, safety. It's really important if, whether your parents are fundamentalists or otherwise, that's kind of incidental. But it's picking safe people in your life to share with is important. It's important for the children. It's equally as important for the parents. And because there are people, and so we tell people we've got a gay son, and I don't know why, but it seems as though it's amazing how many people want to immediately give you their stance on homosexuality. Well, I just want you to know it's my belief, and it's like, okay, thank you.
Try being the gay son. That happens to us as well.
Exactly. But so safety is important. Our ministry is really focused at conservative Christian parents that have LGBTQ kids. And that's very intentional because it's the most conservative Christian parents who have the greatest amount of rejection for their child. And Justin, as you know and we know, for kids that are rejected either by their families or the church, incidence of suicide grows dramatically, like 800% higher. Suicide, self-harm, what have you. And so that's kind of the thing that we focus on are those who are most marginalized by this and most hurt by it. And so part of our ministry, by the way, is if you're a child and your parents are rejecting and don't want to talk, you can go to our website. You'll find a quick 5-minute clip of Greg and Lynn's story. If you like it, share with your parents. Just say, hey, these are some friends of ours. And we thought you might be interested in listening to their story. We talk to parents around the country. Kids refer us. Counselors refer us. We talk to people all over the place on a regular basis. We're happy to do that. That's why our ministry exists. We just reached a point where, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well, it's really difficult when any of us see somebody being harmed. And it's especially difficult if that person happens to be marginalized. But when the person is marginalized, they're being harmed, and it's in the name of God, it's like, whoa, it gets stuck right here. Mm-hmm. And actually, our pastor, Andy Stanley, asked the question now about 4 years ago. And it was in a sermon series, and the series concluded with him asking this question: what breaks your heart? And we were in a small group, and we both looked at each other, and we said, oh my gosh, it's the LGBT community.
Absolutely.
And it was months later when we made this our full-time deal of just trying to help families.
And North Point does have a group called Parent Connect, and where they have a group of people with LGBT kids, and we meet. I think it's probably over 100 people now. And certainly we could put you in touch with the person that her first name is Amy, and I'm sure she'd be happy to talk with the parents or the kids. And I just thought of this. I was just thinking, Mother Teresa. I was raised Catholic, and now I'm going to a Protestant church. But Mother Teresa said at a prayer breakfast one time, She said, about abortion, bring the babies to me. And I say, okay, as McMom and McDad, bring the LGBT kids to us, okay? We'll love them in the meantime as they reconcile with their parents. We would be happy to be there for them. So
we've been nicknamed McMom and McDad by, unfortunately, way too many LGBT kids who've been rejected or put out or kicked out of their homes, and they're looking for a surrogate parent. And so we try to stand in that gap. But, there's fabulous...
Unfortunately, not because you don't want to be McMom and McDad, but unfortunate because they don't have support from their own parents.
Exactly.
It's a tragedy, right? Yeah. But there's also a number of great online groups, and you can find some of those on our website. But there's a bunch, and if you have questions about them, don't hesitate to call us, write us.
If they're safe or not safe.
We'll be happy to help you try to find the right group to plug into. But don't go it alone, whether you're a child or whether you're the parent. To walk this journey on your own, it's not wise. The reality is this: if we've been down this highway before and we know the bridge is out up ahead, we can wave a caution flag and say, slow down, bridge out. You still have the ability to try to speed up and jump it or to slow down. But the point is, having somebody to walk with you is very important.
So we're getting towards the end of our time. I want to give you a chance to talk about your ministry and let people know how to get in touch with you and read your book and everything. But there's at least one more question that I just wanted to pop up here if I can find it in my list of questions. Okay. So Michael wants to know, how do you recommend approaching the topic with his parents? He says, I can't think of how to begin. My father has been a pastor in a very fundamental conservative church for 40 years. I don't want to make it harder for my parents, but I can't imagine them changing their minds and accepting me. You found out in a less than ideal way that your son was gay. Do you have suggestions for kids who want to come out to their parents, or maybe the parents already know but want to start this conversation?
Yes. One of the things that I would suggest is you need to make sure you're prepared for the answer. It might not be what you want. And so if that's the case, I would say maybe you need to wait until you are prepared to hear their answer. But there are actually parents that we've worked with too that it's amazing. I think the kids would be surprised that their parents may not understand it, but they'll immediately say, I love you. And, I don't understand this, but I will always love you. So I would just before you go down that road, make sure you're prepared, because there have been parents who do not respond well. And, sometimes you can just sort of test it out a bit. You know your parents better than we do, and know whether or not that would be a healthy conversation. Also, you can have conversations with other people who have had those conversations and see how that has worked for them. But I think honesty is always the best policy.
Absolutely.
And, it will, they just will
part of our
figure it out.
Part of our ministry is helping connect people. So, for instance, in Atlanta, Lynn was talking about Parent Connect with North Point. It's a fabulous ministry that helps countless parents and their kids. But we get calls from Seattle to Portland and everywhere in between.
Pastors.
And, we minister to a number of pastors that they've received that news and they don't know how to handle it. Pastors especially are in a tough place because not only is it the reputation, in many cases it means their livelihood, and that's not fair either. But that's the reality of it. So I agree with Lynn. I think safety is always first, but honesty is right there. I think to carry a burden by yourself it's not good for you. It's not good physically, mentally, or spiritually.
I wish I did not have to wrap this up because this is so good, and hopefully we can have another conversation soon. I just am so appreciative of you all for your ministry, for your compassion, your love and grace in the midst of disagreement, which is something that anybody who has followed me knows is like a really big deal to me. And your book, Embracing the Journey, A Christian Parent's Guide to Loving Your LGBTQ Child, which is out tomorrow. It is out tomorrow. So tell folks how they can get Embracing the Journey, A Christian Parent's Guide to Loving Your LGBTQ Child, and how they can get in touch with you all, because I'm sure people have lots more questions.
Absolutely.
Well, if all goes as planned, you ought to be able to go to your favorite bookseller, whether it's online or literally down the street. But it's available everywhere.
Amazon, yeah. Barnes and Nobles.
And
go ahead.
Yeah. So it's available now by morning. And in terms of contacting us, you can find us online at www.embracingthejourney.org. And you'll not only be able to connect with us there, but you'll also find lots of other really, really helpful resources that, when I say helpful resources, they're resources that have really helped us on our journey. So it's good stuff. Justin, we thank you for the opportunity to chat. And as we've told you before, we just love your spirit.
Love what you're.
Well, likewise. I love you guys, and I can tell you're getting a lot of love from the Facebook viewers here. And this episode is going to go up on YouTube after this. So if folks had trouble streaming it or whatever, I know sometimes that happens. It'll be up on YouTube, and I know you'll get love there. But I just want to encourage everybody, whether you are an LGBTQ person, or whether you are the parent of an LGBTQ person, or whether you just care about this and think that you might know somebody who could use this. This is a phenomenal book. It's been endorsed both in terms of like formally and informally by a bunch of people who, from different perspectives, who've all been really touched by this. So I can't say enough good things about it. Embracing the Journey, A Christian Parent's Guide to Loving Your LGBTQ Child, out tomorrow. Embracingthejourney.org, you said, is your ministry. And I want to close with a quote. I haven't done that before. Tonight, I want to close with a quote. But first, I just want to say thank you again to Greg and Lynn McDonald for being here. Thanks, guys. I appreciate this. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. You can search the entire Geeky Justin Live archive that I'm building up, along with blog posts and articles and resources at GeekyJustin.com. That's GeekyJustin, JUSTIN.com. You can be notified of new videos by subscribing at youtube.com/GeekyJustin. And if you want to participate in the future and ask your questions live, as the folks who are watching this live right now know, you can follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/GeekyJustin. Geeky Justin Live is brought to you by, I have to mention this, my Patreon patrons. Thank you especially to Gold Star patrons Liz, Tom, Carol, Bruce, John, Larry, and Terry, and to all the other patrons who make this possible. You all rock. If you're not yet a patron, go to geekyjustin.com/Patreon to learn how to become one, and you can gain instant access to bonus content and other perks. That's the little, pitch I got to put in there. But now, in honor of our guests and their book, I want to leave you with this quote from another Christian author who was one of my very favorites growing up, Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote this: "We do not draw people to Christ by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it." So I want to say thanks, Greg and Lynn, for shining your light in such a compelling and wonderful way. Thanks. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and be excellent to each other. And don't forget the nuance. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.